Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Madrid. I'm currently completing my master's in anthrozoology at the University of Exeter. Today I'm here to talk about my personal reflections during the process of conducting research with interlocutors in Southeast Asia. As researchers, we're tasked with considering the ways in which our research will impact the field, policy, public perception, and our interlocutors themselves. In the interest of reflexivity, we must also consider the position and consequent biases from which we're approaching a given issue. While often uncomfortable, these considerations can at times change the course of our research, demonstrating the impact of critical scholarship on ourselves as researchers. I'll begin by offering a brief overview of the context in which my research takes place and the issues that I intended to address with my work. I'll talk a bit about what my goals were initially when I embarked on this project and the initially approved methodologies. Next, I'll discuss the ways in which the lives of my interlocutors were affected by a series of events that forced me to contemplate how I have to reconcile my role as a researcher with my responsibilities to those I consider friends in a country under duress. I'll go on to consider issues of globalized exploitation, saviorism, and the continued role we as researchers have in upholding these power hierarchies. Finally, I'd like to share my personal reflections on the ways in which the well-meaning academic, much like the eco-conscious tourist, can imagine ourselves to be less exploitative while avoiding accountability for the less explicit ways in which we may be perpetuating harm. My hope is that in sharing my experience of considering these uncomfortable and difficult questions, my talk can prompt everyone listening to reflect on their own impact as researchers as well. So, Myanmar is home to one of the last remaining old-growth teak forests, a fact owed in part to the use of elephants to selectively harvest the lumber rather than clear-cutting the forested area. The use of elephants allows access to areas that can't necessarily be traversed safely by humans on foot or in machinery. While this practice is quite sustainable relative to alternatives, deforestation continued at an unsustainable rate, forcing the implementation of various restrictions intended to protect the future of the industry. Between 2014 and 2016, the Myanmar government began to phase out their annual revenue targets and reduce the subcontracting to private elephant owners. These initiatives were intended to offset deforestation, as well as ensure that any available labor went to the elephants owned by the Myanmar Timber Enterprise. This allowed the company to ensure it remained financially stable despite the reduction in lumber harvesting. In 2016, a year-long total logging ban was implemented, followed by a 10-year teak logging ban specific to the forests of Bagoyoma. Finally, in 2017, the government implemented a substantial quota reduction due to an absence of viable trees for harvesting. The implementation of these restrictions has caused both private owners and MTE-owned elephants to experience job loss. These animal laborers have in many cases been trained for this work since their youth and are accustomed to physical and cognitive stimulation on a regular basis, the absence of which is resulting in boredom, the development of stereotype movements, similar to the welfare issues that arise in zoo environments, as well as negative changes in their overall physical health. For the owners, the loss of contracts with the lumber industry results in difficulty sustaining their families, feeding their elephants, paying the Uzis who train and manage the elephants, and obtaining the animals' necessary medical care, which can be quite costly when not provided through the MTE. An eco-centric worldview considers the well-being of humans, other than human animals, and the natural environment to be intrinsically interdependent, and works to recognize the inherent value in all living beings, irrespective of their measurable utility or monetary value to humans. According to conversations with various staff and the introduction to the site offered by the founders, the camp at which I volunteered operates with the intent to both teach and embody principles of ecocentrism. While this facility continues to receive tourists, offers a gift shop, and provides elephant encounters as a means of securing constant flow of capital, I believe that the considerations they make to support the elephant and human residents allow them to be classified as ecocentric. These include a strict adherence to capacity thresholds, limited working hours for the elephants and Uzis, no performances or rides, and ongoing access to medical care with the on-site veterinarian. Additionally, the elephants are released to free roam on camp land from 4 p.m. to 9 a.m. each night with no hobble ties. To support the human individuals affected by the timber industry decline, the camp maintains relationships with the MTE and private owners to subsidize income and provides employed Uzis with Social Security, health benefits, and a family home on camp land, where they engage in sustainable farming to provide food for both employees and guests. The camp founders also built and maintain a nearby school for the children of their employees and offer guests the opportunity to plant a sapling before leaving. So, my project was initially designed with the aim of investigating eco-centric tourism as a solution for funding and supporting the care, enrichment, and protection of these unemployed lumber industry elephants in Myanmar. Specifically, I planned to use the retirement camp at which I worked as a case study to demonstrate the ways in which ecotourism can support the interests of elephants, owners, mahouts, and the community while still maintaining the income required to provide necessary land, food, and veterinary care. In late 2019, an opportunity arose to assist with a project working directly with a small herd of captive elephants at a camp in Myanmar. While the organization I accompany typically works training veterinarians in Asia, the project was created to raise funds and provide volunteer labor from lay people as well. So I jumped at the chance to attend, raise the required funds, and set out to do what I felt was offering direct value to animals I have always loved. Not being a veterinarian, or a seasoned volunteer with the capital to visit and assist frequently, I found myself searching for any way that I could add value beyond my physical labor on site. As the trip drew to an end, listening to all the owners had to share about the history of the facility, their mission, and the obstacles they face, I just asked them outright, "What can I do to help you?" I explained my current program of study, and I offered the small platform I have as an early career researcher to help elevate their voice and their mission as a model for retired elephant management. The founder immediately suggested a follow-up interview when I returned home after their busy season had come to an end. So, in addition to the planned semi structured interview, I conducted an analysis of multiple Asian elephant camp visitor reviews publicly posted on the TripAdvisor website to identify trends in contentment level, frequent complaints, adjective use patterns, and trends in emotive language. This information was used to assess visitor response to various attractions at elephant camps with regards to enjoyment, emotion, and connection to the elephant workers. My intent with this aspect of the project was to explore the feasibility of a general shift towards a more ecocentric, therefore less anthropocentric, elephant tourism industry. The direction of my final project has had to shift in the wake of the global pandemic, the deaths of two elderly elephant matriarchs at the camp, and the subsequent military takeover in Myanmar. In early 2020, I began to contemplate the morality of following through with my interview plans despite already having obtained ethics approval and written participant consent. This reconsidering of my research plans was initially due to the huge toll that the COVID-19 global pandemic took on developing countries with limited emergency healthcare resources, like Myanmar. In the midst of a crumbling tourism industry due to the freezing of global travel and the redirecting of their resources to send food to both healthcare workers and those who are ill, the camp suffered the loss of two elderly elephant matriarchs within a week. While both died of natural causes in their golden years, it was still a devastating blow to the small herd of 8, and especially the adolescent bull living on site. These older ladies were effectively his grandmothers, and the grief over their passing transcended species and region barriers. Finally, and perhaps most notably, it no longer feels ethical to me to pursue an interview session when my interlocutors are embroiled in a civil disobedience movement to regain their democracy after the February 1st military coup that included the detainment of their elected leader. Since the initial coup, the Tatmadaw have harmed and killed protesters, restricted access to PPE and oxygen tanks, and even detained some medical professionals who were found to be servicing the general population. This has worsened the state of the pandemic substantially, as only those with connections to the military have full access to the resources required. So, these unforeseen obstacles have prompted me to really take a step back as a scholar and instead focus on the changing needs of the people I care about in a more informal capacity. Maintaining objectivity as qualitative researchers is known to be an impossible task since we can't remove our life experiences and our biases from how we perceive and analyze our data. But I did find myself questioning if there were boundaries that I should be holding during the process of my research. Namely, as a Western contact, I've been tasked with continuing to ensure the news of the situation in Myanmar and the experience of the civilians there is shared widely. Especially early in the civilian fight for the reinstatement of their democracy, media and internet access were subject to rolling blackouts nationwide to avoid international press getting information about the situation on the ground. I found myself filling more the role of an advocate than an academic this year, which prompted me to think on where the line between those two roles actually lies. At what point does the participant part of participant observation end? I care deeply about the people, both human and elephant, with whom I have a professional scholarly relationship. So, wouldn't that care make the relationship personal as well? These considerations had me wondering if there's a line between academic and advocate at all. Is it more akin to a Venn diagram than a line? A spectrum? Likely a product of the underlying anarchical philosophy I take with all my relationships, regardless of species, I would say that this negotiation of roles is one that must occur in every individual researcher researched relationship, and would then be unique to the combination of individuals involved. But if I must find a way to generalize, I would draw on the work of Hastrup and Elsas and conclude that anthrozoology, by its very nature, implies involvement to some degree. Simple acceptance of the impact of one's research, both directly during fieldwork and indirectly upon publication, may seem passive to the scholar, but the tangible effects of that impact will still be felt directly by the participants and subjects of the research. So, are we then not tasked with ensuring that any effect we cause is positive and active, in line with the needs and wants of our subjects? My motivation for this research stemmed in part from a lifelong fascination with charismatic megafauna such as elephants and rhinos, as well as the change I experienced when face to face with elephant individuals and those humans who live and work with them. A long standing order of my own personal activism is a deeply felt responsibility to use my position of privilege to elevate the voices of those often unheard. Practical difficulties and unforeseen obstacles aside, the most personally impactful subject on which I would like to reflect is the theme of simultaneous responsibility and helplessness I found woven through my own notes taken while on site. The work of Davian, witnessing animal suffering as a catalyst to a lifetime of responsibility, resonated with me at first reading, calling back to my experience caring for shelter cats in my hometown. I had not been prepared for the visceral reaction I experienced when witnessing an elephant's suffering. Perhaps I was under some false sense of security, either from my time working with abused and neglected cats, or the weeks spent learning about the life histories of each resident at the camp. Either way, I realized with some intensity that the witnessing of an individual's ongoing suffering and connecting with them in that moment is rather different than learning about one's historical suffering and dealing with the residual physical and emotional trauma. While working at the camp, there was always this layer of hope that I became accustomed to. With every terrible story, every horrible injury, there was the knowledge that the individual was now safe at the facility where they could relax and enjoy their retirement. The day I spent assisting the mobile veterinary unit was an entirely different experience. We were traveling to meet private owners for regular deworming, body condition assessment, and disseminating educational information. The privately owned elephants were mostly employed in performance work, so I entered each interaction theoretically knowing, that they were still possibly undergoing some of the abuses that the camp residents had survived. The general demeanor in each group was so different from the peaceful comfort at the facility. There was a feeling of anxiety in the air, much like I myself would feel while waiting at the dentist. Two moments in particular reflected for me the intimacy and empathetic connection on which becoming animals predicated. The first was during a mobile veterinary unit trip, at which point I met an 11-year-old bull elephant who worked in performance. I recall being surprised to learn how young he was, as there was a bull of the same age at the facility. Named a translation of trouble or menace, this child lived up to his name. He clung to the elder females, trumpeted when he wanted attention from humans, and became completely transfixed by a net puzzle feeder we made for enrichment. In stark contrast, the young man at the field site looked dejected, with blank eyes I could not help but look at. There was so much pain in those eyes, and yet, when they met mine, his trunk snapped up into a curled position and his head raised as if conditioned to perform immediately upon being subjected to the human gaze. In that moment, I felt my stomach plummet and my eyes fill with tears. The reality of this individual's life experience struck me, and I thought of just how many other working elephants felt the same pain and resignation. The value I previously thought I was adding, the good I thought I was doing on this trip, suddenly felt so small and insignificant in the grand scheme of elephant suffering. The second moment by which I felt permanently changed came later that day after arriving back at the camp. I was assisting the mahouts with bathing and exfoliating the older female elephants who struggle with some of their own care due to age and injury, while carefully scrubbing a 67-year-old matriarch. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to my chest. I felt her deep fatigue wash over me as her shoulders and back relaxed slightly, and I could do nothing but breathe and wait. While likely only seconds, that moment felt like an eternity, and I found myself unsure how I could ever offer adequate comfort for the immense pain and trauma she must have gone through in those first 60 years before arriving at the camp. How much would that young bull go through before he's able to retire? It was shortly after completing her bath that I spoke with the founders, seeking a way, any way, that I could use my skill set to help them. I know I can't personally save every elephant or assist every person, but I still felt a powerful call to do what I could for whoever I could. My own impulse to step in and help offers a fitting segue to possibly the most uncomfortable topic on which I've had to reflect: my own tendency towards saviorism. Western saviorism, often termed white saviorism due to the inherent proximity of the West to hierarchical constructions of whiteness, comes with a lot of nuance when addressing issues of global exploitation between colonized and colonizer countries. Globalization continues to coercively underdevelop and exploit nations devastated by imperialism for labor, resources, and entertainment, while acting as savior against the ramifications of those very issues. Often normalized are the efforts of Western organizations in fabricating a self celebrating, feel good version of social responsibility. At the intersection of these foreign interests lies tourism. I'd like to touch briefly on the romanticism at play in the defining of elephants. For international tourists, a leading attraction is the wildness and exoticism of animals to whom the tourist would not have access at home, often held in contrast to more curated versions of those same species in captive exhibits. Such exhibits can feel less realistic, and those individuals on display within them more like objects than sentient beings. Romanticizing of nature often comes from those in urban areas at great distance from the individual relationships with the land or animals in question. And unsurprisingly, this mentality parallels attitudes towards interactions with local people, often manifesting as infantilization, charitable behaviors, and a sense of entitlement to service. Such attitudes contribute to the push by advocacy agencies for one size fits all solutions that may dismiss the expertise of local people on the basis that outsiders have greater access to knowledge. Ultimately, this ignores consequences they may experience as a result of these strategies. Perhaps the most disturbing example I witnessed firsthand was an individual attempting to bridge the English Burmese language barrier to berate a server for providing her with a plastic straw. She felt it was her responsibility to bring the knowledge she held as an American regarding the impact of single use plastics and demand immediate action on the issue from a small business in another country. The audacity of the incident to me was baffling, yet I've had to unpack my own version of saviorism as a Canadian volunteerist in Asia. While in Myanmar, I felt a constant urge to overtip any service employees I interacted with. I refused to haggle with shop owners and pay the stated price. I sought ways to further my positive impact for the elephants and the people there. Can I really contribute that much? Are they not doing just fine without me? Do they even want my help, or am I revoking their agency just by offering it? If I can assist, though, am I not morally obligated to do so? The ongoing impacts of globalization and colonialism have left Myanmar vulnerable to further economic distress should they see a decline in their lumber or tourism industries, contributing to an already severe global wealth disparity. I feel it's important to also consider guilt and a sense of responsibility as major driving factors for the continued Western tourism to sites such as this one. A common theme in the positive reviews I analyzed was to comment on the high price of the experience alongside caveats designed to encourage readers that the price is reasonable. Some had a description of where the money is going, like the camp funded school, the residents' veterinary care, the mobile veterinary unit, etc., while others noted that they would rather pay a higher price than attend a camp where the elephants seem unhappy, forcefully controlled, or in poor health. To quote one of the reviews I read, "It is our privilege to take part in some of the work that needs to be done for their care." In this way, the education and care focused experiences offered by the camp work to foster an empathetic connection between tourist and elephant, akin to my experiences of witnessing suffering and sharing a moment with the individual elephants. Tourists are offered the opportunity to learn about each of their employment histories, health concerns, behavioral indicators of trauma, and the story behind their names. Through this storytelling and the face to face connection, these elephants become individuals while still maintaining their role as a representative of their species. The viewer can connect to the individual through acknowledging difference and similarity, applying egomorphism to perceive the elephant as their own person, with thoughts, emotions, and life experiences. In that way, the elephants at the camp hold simultaneous roles as a person, an ambassador, and a product. Empathy as an educational tool and advertising strategy could then be used as a powerful motivator for shifting tourists towards more ecocentric and symbiotic choices when traveling. Mullen used the lens of Balinese cockfighting to expand upon a memorable quote by Donna Haraway: "We polish an animal mirror to look for ourselves." I think this concept is highly applicable when investigating animal encounter tourism, be it in a captive, wild, or semi captive environment. Ecotourism allows us to see a good tourist in that animal mirror, much like we, as anthropologists, aim to see a good scholar, one making a lower negative impact, or even a perceived net positive one. The ecocentric tourist can feel less exploitative and shirk the responsibility of the hardships that the animals and people have experienced because they, we, are there helping. So, thank you so much for listening. I want to end with the smiling face of beautiful Ninsitway because I just love this picture so much. And there's a list of references there. I know it's hard to catch it quickly in a talk, so if you are interested, please feel free to email me and I can send you the slides. Thanks.